everybody. First of all, thank you for being here and for joining me in this conversation about audition preparation and preparing for pretty much any kind of stressful performance situation which has some kind of competitive aspect to it. Obviously, this is a very specific topic and it's a very specific musical experience compared to a normal performance which doesn't have a competitive aspect to it. So it is a very specific topic, but I do also feel pretty strongly that many of the things that I'm going to talk about also apply to normal practice planning and anything to do with preparing some kind of performance or audition. So just for a bit of context to start off with, and why I chose to speak about this topic, is that I have been kind of in the middle of the process of preparing for auditions for the past 2 or so years, while I've been part of the Orchestra Academy here at the Bamberger Symphonica in Germany. And about 3 weeks ago, I had a successful audition for a job, which allowed me to put all of the things that I've learned here into practice and see how they actually function. So basically, I thought it's a really good time to talk about this topic, seeing as I've freshly just been through the whole process myself personally, and a lot of the things that I've learned are still very fresh in my mind, and it seemed like a good time to talk about this. So basically what I've tried to do now is summarize a lot of things that I've learned from musicians in the orchestra here, from lessons that I've received during the time in the academy here, and also tips and ideas that I've kind of picked up along the way from mental training lessons that I've also had as part of the academy, and experiences that I've had. For example, we have a terrifyingly realistic mock audition thing that we do here, and that's also been a huge learning experience through which I have kind of found many different ways to prepare for auditions themselves. So basically it's a very personal process for everybody, so a lot of things I'm going to say, just be aware they worked for me, but that might not mean that they will work for everybody. And at the beginning of this whole process of auditions, there's so much advice floating around, like people tend to just say very generalized things like just practice a lot, or play for people as much as you can, or just think about the music and you won't get nervous. And as useful as these kind of bits of advice are, and as well-meaning as they are, usually that kind of stuff doesn't really help so much when what you really need is a very specific and structured plan to help you get through this crazy process. And also, just from personal experience, for me, as a kind of my practice style is not usually very organized or structured at all. I've never been that kind of a practicer. I'm definitely more of an intuitive person, which is also maybe just a very nice word for slightly chaotic practicer. But through that process, I found a structured way to work that actually really helped me in the end. So that's kind of what I'm going to go through today, is the structured practice plan that I use to prepare for auditions, and any kind of extra ideas that I had along the way. Okay, so basically, practically speaking, the first thing that I did when I got an audition date, or I knew I wanted to prepare for an audition, was that I set up a kind of timeline around 2 months before the audition, approximately, depending on how much other work you have going on, or university classes or other rehearsals. You want to work around that and just sit down with a notebook and write down some very vague ideas about how much time you have, and then tried to narrow that down to a more specific weekly plan. So I would say around about 6 weeks, you want to have a 6-week plan before the date of the audition. And I found it super helpful to work backwards from the audition date. So you use the audition date as your goal, and then you work your timeline back week by week by week until you get to the beginning. So that helps you actually to get a much better idea of how much time you need. Instead of working from where you are now until the audition, sometimes it doesn't give you quite the right time frame. So basically I found it super helpful to write out this timeline in a notebook that I kept with me the whole way through the process in my instrument case. I took it with me to lessons, to every practice session, and also used it to write down little bits of information about things that I was trying to improve on, or negative thoughts that I was having and how I could try to improve upon those things, or also positive things, like writing down things that I felt that I was doing well. It's sometimes very important to externally process that stuff, and sometimes just literally seeing it written down on a piece of paper is a huge help, psychologically speaking. Okay, so a big question that I got was, what should you include in this timeline? How do you structure this timeline for this incredibly stressful and crazy process that's ahead of you? First of all, sit down with this notebook and structure week by week. Write down how many weeks you have. Make a piece of paper for each week, or however you want to do it. Try to avoid panic and chaos taking over, which is easier said than done. Calmly spend a few days doing this. Give yourself enough time to really think about it. Let's see, what have I got here? Apart from this, before I get into the timeline itself, I just want to add that apart from practice and all of those things that we all know about, try to get the rest of your life into a bit of a good space at this time. For me, it was super helpful to get rid of as many external stresses that I could in my life at this time. So don't say yes to too many projects, to too much chamber music, to too many gigs, if at all possible. Try to prioritize this one thing and make a little bit of a bubble around yourself for the next few weeks. Remember, it's just a couple of weeks. It's not going to last forever. So try to prioritize that. You have enough time for yourself and enough time to also spend your free time doing non-music things, non-audition preparation things, because in order to get through the whole process, you need to have the energy to do that. So it's super important to allow yourself enough time outside of the practice room to rest. It really helped me, I must say, it really helped me to imagine that I was a sports person preparing for a big event, because I feel like sports people tend to take way more care of themselves physically and psychologically than musicians do, which is, it's a very bad habit that a lot of musicians have, is not prioritizing psychological well-being or physical well-being. So really try and think about all those things. You want to eat healthily, do plenty of exercise, prioritize all of that stuff. And also I kind of try to imagine that I myself was a coach for myself as a sports person, coaching myself through this process and talking nicely to myself in the way that I would talk to a friend who was also preparing for something stressful like this. Okay, so basically now I think what would be good, I'm going to talk about the timeline, the practical aspects of this timeline that I worked out for myself, in case it might be helpful to somebody else who's wanting to plan this kind of process. So, getting back to the dividing my weeks ahead of the audition into smaller units, what I did at the very beginning was, so let's say we have a 6-week plan or a 5-week plan. For week 1, I basically sat down and made a Spotify or YouTube playlist with about 3 versions of every single excerpt, so that you get an idea of the different styles that the excerpt might be played in, different tempi, different sounds, different any kind of discrepancies between different versions of any work. You want to at least listen to 3 different versions of every single excerpt, so that you're aware that there's not just one, you're not just practicing at one tempo, and then suddenly you get into the audition and they ask you to play more slowly, because that can happen as well, and then you feel stressed because you haven't prepared it in any other way. So you need to be a little bit more open-minded about that. Seems obvious, but it's very easy to forget about those kind of things when you are stressed. So week 1 is making your playlist, listening to your music, getting into the zone in terms of that kind of stuff. And then at the same time, this is when you want to make a daily schedule for your practice. So write down all of the repertoire you have ahead of you. What I did that was super helpful actually was I made a kind of rotation of repertoire. I split it into 2 sections, an A and a B, because it's just too much stuff to do in one day, and it gets very chaotic very easily when you have so much stuff to prepare. So I made a kind of A program, which was 3 excerpts plus my classical concerto, and then the B program would be, for example, the remaining 3 excerpts plus my romantic concerto. And then I do like the A program on Monday, and then B program on Tuesday, and then maybe a break on Wednesday, or if I had other rehearsals and no time, then I would just keep rotating these programs to keep everything going regularly, but also not overdoing it or under practicing certain things. And then, so during this first week, I pretty much only focused on practicing everything super slowly with a metronome, no vibrato, no emotions involved. You want to build a super solid basis. And you can even work on how much time you want to spend on each excerpt every day. And working within that kind of time frame basically just allows you, or stops you from focusing or stressing too much about one thing, and then you end up working for 2 hours on one excerpt, and then you have no time left for the rest of them. So you want to keep everything balanced and regular. And after this first week of getting everything up to a nice solid basis, in the second week you want to start alternating between metronome practice and also practicing without the metronome, starting to get an idea of the sound you want for each separate excerpt and each separate composer. This is a hugely important thing that the panel is listening for, rather than just technical perfection. They want to know that you're aware of the different sound and style of each composer or piece of music, especially for something like opera, or there's just, you need to be aware of all the different styles. That's very important. And then basically the remaining few weeks, like the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th week, is where you want to start ramping up how often you play through your excerpts and your concertos. And this is where you really want to start playing for people, playing through for friends, for teachers, having lessons, doing mock auditions. And I think the key to this is not just to do it once, but to repeat this at least 2 to 3 times a week, which seems like a lot, but at one point I even did it every single day, and it was so tiring and it was very stressful. But in the audition itself is when I realized, okay, I see why that was helpful only now. But try to play through for people. Make sure you do a mock audition at least 3 times in the actual clothing that you're going to wear, in your shoes. You can even prepare. What I did once or twice, which sounds a little bit crazy, but definitely helped me personally, was to even prepare the night before, mentally visualize, imagine, okay, tomorrow is the audition, and how do I want to plan my morning on the day of the audition that's relaxing for me. And you can even try that out once or twice. If you have a playthrough coming up the next day, prepare yourself mentally the night before even, and when you're doing the mock audition, walk into the room in the way that you want to walk in and kind of present yourself in an audition. That's a very important thing to practice, because it's important to remember that it's not just your playing that you are wanting to show to the panel. It's very much about they're looking for a colleague that they want to work with, someone who is friendly, someone who's relaxed, someone who's easy to work with, someone who's professional. So you want to dress comfortably, but also it needs to be professional and put together, and that stuff all actually has a huge impact and also makes you feel good when you're in that zone. So you want to practice basically making the mock auditions as realistic as possible. And then, yeah, so that's basically, I would say that's the most important thing to be doing in the last 2 or so weeks before the audition itself, so that you're totally in that zone and it feels kind of normal to be doing that regularly. Yeah, and I think basically some other things to remember and some other key points would be to take, as I said before, take plenty of breaks. Make sure you have enough time outside of your practice to rest and do sport. And basically what's super important, I think, is that you, above all, you have to practice these other things as much as you practice your instrument itself. So for example, in terms of mental preparation, someone sent a question asking, how do you stay focused in the moment of an audition, when in that moment when you walk into the room and you start to feel this kind of panic and you just want to run out again? And how do you focus yourself when you're about to start playing? Something that helped me a lot with this was also preparing myself by meditating, and this is kind of a personal thing as well. It depends on whether you feel comfortable with that, whether you're interested in that. But I found it super helpful to train my mind to be able to focus and to pull my focus back into the moment, into the present, when, especially in that moment when you're very stressed out, that's the moment when your brain goes into fight or flight mode and you start thinking about everything that could go wrong. And that's exactly when mistakes start to come in, is because you want to start over controlling the situation, and that is exactly when things start to go wrong. So being able to train your mind to kind of stop over controlling in that moment is a huge help. But again, there's kind of a little bit of a different topic, which I'm very interested in personally. So if you have specific questions about that, I have a lot of information about that as well. So just send me a message, an email or whatever, or contact Merwe. I'd be very happy to, if anyone also would like some other information or resources, things that I've used, apps, books, websites, or other things that I've used to help me prepare, I'd be very happy to just send you a list or an email with more information about that stuff. So please feel free to ask me any questions, or just drop me an email. And I think that's pretty much it. I'm maybe just going to check. I had 1 or 2 other small questions that I think I didn't answer yet. And that question was 1 or 2 of these. Let's have a look. Did you have lessons during your preparation time for the auditions? Yes, I did. I had a lot of lessons from people in the orchestra here, which I was very lucky to have access to have had access to. I had about 2 lessons a week for 4 weeks, I would say, in total, or 1 lesson a week for a couple of weeks leading up to it. Should be enough. Try not to get too many lessons with too many different people, because conflicting opinions can just create confusion and insecurity, which is not what you want. Another question was, how much do you practice with a metronome? Well, as I said a little bit earlier, you want to try to incorporate that kind of practice at the beginning. Well, all the way through you need to be checking with your metronome, but not all the time. Too much practice with a metronome can also restrict your playing a lot, and that's also obviously not a good thing. So I would say not every day. Try to alternate your days where you really practice for rhythmic stability and things like that. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. So thank you so much for listening. I hope this could be helpful to somebody, and just once again, disclaimer, this is totally coming from my personal experience, and you have to find a way that works for you, and most often you just have to go through the process yourself once or twice, and it's a little bit of trial and error, and yeah, it's a stressful process, but there are ways to help yourself and to structure the process that allows it to be much easier. So thank you so much for joining, and if you have any questions at all, please just send me an email or send me a message. I'd be very happy to answer some more specific questions. Thank you.